I expected, out of 160 plus interviews, ones that were old enough to remember the 67 change, I expected it to be this dramatic, everyone on the streets kind of song and dance moment of like, ah. And actually what I found was most people went, yeah, it didn't change anything. It was so disappointing in a way, but I see where they were coming from, because to them, they were just trying to keep their head down. They were trying to go about their business and not be discovered. And that's not just from a police perspective. That's from like they could lose their job, their families, them in one of those marriages, they could lose their partner. So for a lot of people, it was business as usual. And because there was all this like visibility all of a sudden, and I did say there were some good elements to that, but there was a lot of bad in that the newspaper really went for the community and like called out people. There were horrendous stories. If you were trans, you were looking at stories about April Ashley being absolutely outed on the front page of like every major newspaper. If you're looking like closer to home, there's one of the last cases before the law change was Nottingham. One guy that the police went to go and interview about something completely different, and they turned up to his home and realised he was living with a man. And certainly one of the bigger cases in 61 or 63, was also Nottingham based, where like something insane, like 18 men were arrested for having a party where there was various levels of, things happening. So, you're reading all of that, the increased spotlight, people's reactions are not super fantastic. So it takes society an awful long time to catch up with where the law is at. So for people on a day-to-day basis, it's not going to change anything immediately. There's going to be a lot of work that has to go into. And it's also, like I said about the newspaper articles, not being helped by that. It does again have some positives in that it does make people aware that these people exist, that this exists, these situations. But it's a double-edged sword, very much. The creative communities and LGBT communities within Nottingham, we all know each other. And you can imagine, like, in a wider context outside of those communities, Nottingham is a small city. So the chances of you being spotted and arrested or seen going into the place or like caught with somebody are much, much higher than if you are in London, where you've been sort of swallowed up by the big city. And there's a lot more. So why a lot of people left and went down to London and went, well, I can't live a lie anymore. I really just need to have that anonymous kind of atmosphere where I don't have to be looking over my shoulder to make sure that I'm not being seen going into the Flying Horse or any of those things. The main stories that we hear about decriminalisation and queer history, they come from Manchester and London, which are much bigger cities than Nottingham. So their experiences are similar, but completely different at the same time. We have to think about our history in the context of a much smaller, tighter-knit community, much more working class, and we have to be aware that that changes an awful lot for us. If you look at the Wolfden report, which was literally 10 years to decriminalisation, right? It is, and that very much is the first step for us. That is very, that's a huge thing as well that often gets overshadowed, because when we talk about queer history, we often jump in at 67. We forget that with that report, it was very much, we were sort of lumped in with sex workers, and which is absolutely, sex work is work, and I support that. But at the same time, they didn't see any difference between homosexuality and sex work, and they put the two together. To think back to the 1950s, where people aren't happy about women in general, sex workers in general, gay people in general, like they're not happy about anything, to be honest. But, nobody's got any freedoms. We do not have the understanding of sex work that we have today, or the support of, and we still have people that don't support it and don't want that to be a thing. So we've come an awful long way with that. But certainly in the 50s, I can see why they put the two together, because there is a lot of overlap in the way that there's a certain element of cottaging exists, which public sex in places, that also exists within the sex workers community as well. But also I think a lot of the time point you were coming out of, World War II and the country's starting to try and balance out a little bit. And there's this huge focus on vice, this huge belief that like vice is rampant and there's all these like societal problems. And today, looking at that, it's the reports and newspaper articles from that time it's hilarious in a way, because you just think it's like they're talking about unwed mothers and like single people, and like they're horrified by the prospect of people not getting married. And today these are all things that we're just like, yeah, that's totally normal. If you look at Roe v. Wade, for example, it's horrendous the fact that that was overturned, but that is a really prime example that nothing is set in stone, and you are a government change away from, and like a societal shift away from, somebody getting into whatever government and saying, right, well, actually, I don't agree with this. Gone. History works very much in cycles, and I don't think I was prepared for that when I started writing the history books. I was so shocked at how it just repeated. And certainly at the moment, because I'm looking at the 1920s, 30s and 40s, I'm watching that that history repeat itself again. You had Spanish flu, you had COVID. You then have the depression of the 1930s, cost of living crisis. We are pretty much sort of recession adjacent if we are not in a recession. It's no surprise to anybody that things are tight right now, and Nottingham in particular, there is not a huge amount of cash around. And out of that depression in the 30s, you go into World War II. And political upheaval and all the rest of it, which is very much echoed in what we have today, in, you know, the rise of the far right, in Trump, in all of these things. So it really does echo, and it's quite unnerving. And also, if you look at what's happening with the trans community at the moment, it's very reminiscent of Section 28. In fact, when I was writing and researching around Section 28, because that was coming from Ireland, that was not my experience of schooling. We had the Catholic Church, which was totally a very similar but very different thing. But it was unnerving researching and looking into it and watching what's happening today and watching how much we have not learnt from history. And the thing is, if you attack one part of, whether it's the L, the B, the G, the T, whatever it might be, there is nothing stopping that same person from coming for the next and coming for the next and coming for the next. And that's how it works. You know, we are losing books in libraries now as well, which is absolutely wild. We've gone back in time to that as well. That was part of the 1940s, and again the 1980s under Section 28. So it's wild, and we've reached a point where we are not as reactionary as we once were. I don't know what you want to sort of pin that on, whether it's social media or it's just, you know, we're all incredibly busy and broke and dealing with the far right. Whatever you want to say is the cause of that. I think we are very segregated as a community. We have different bars depending on what part of the community we belong to. We've lost our gay clubs, we've lost our gay pubs, all of these things. And as a result, we're not as organised as we used to be. And with that comes a loss of activism. That concerns me, along with this complacency of, oh, well, we've got marriage now. We've got, you know, the age of consent that's all sorted. It's fine. Well, it may not stay that way. And you look at literally the news today about the puberty blockers. It can change at any time. And what's horrendous is a lot of the time these laws are made by people that are not of the community that they're passing the laws about. And it does feel slightly worse when it's an LGBT person that's in the room going, well, I don't think puberty blockers, or I don't think gay marriage, or I don't think this. It does feel slightly like, what? What are you doing? But again, they're not a trans person that's had lived experience of what it's like to be trans in this country. They're somebody that is from a completely different part of the community, or not from the community at all, making rules about things that they just do not understand. And it's such a shame, because they will never meet the people that is going to affect the most. They just won't, and they won't engage with it. And it'll get passed, and it'll just become this thing that, yeah, goes on and on and on until it's overturned 15 years later or something like that. Because after all, we need to remember Section 28 came in 88, went out in 2003, I think, off the top of my head. Now, that's an awful lot of damage done in, like, however many years that is. There's entire, like, decades of school kids that have had different experiences with Section 28 and erasure as a result of it. But we got there in the end. It got to a point where people went, well, this is actually really silly. So if everything is in history goes in cycles, in the early noughties, we had a fantastic run of loads of positive laws being changed, one after the other. You know, we had Section 28 went, same-sex adoption, we had gender recognition, we had all these things, civil partnership 2000 and I want to say 5. I'm hoping that we are due the good times because we are, after COVID, lockdowns and cost of livings and all the rest of it, we're definitely due some good stuff. So I keep holding to maybe we will see the return of the early noughties in more than just fashion.
What is your best memory or feelings that you've experienced from the Nottingham LGBTQ community?
The best part has definitely been the archive, and I know I'm the one that started it, so of course I'm going to say it's the archive. It's definitely given me a way to connect with my city and the city that I've chosen to make my home. It's helped me to connect more to the community that I'm a part of as well. It's just been fascinating. I mean, I've interviewed 162 people, and genuinely I have made so many wonderful connections with people. I have been so incredibly privileged to hear people's stories, to share the really good times, to listen to some of the most heartbreaking stories. And for a lot of people, they haven't told anybody else, and it's something that nobody knows about them, and they've done it, and I feel so incredibly lucky to be that person. I love it. I absolutely love it, and I'm going to find it so hard to not be doing this at some point, which I don't think is ever really going to happen. I've enjoyed every single minute of this, and I really don't want it to end at all. I just want to keep going with it because it has been such a pleasure to dig into the past like this. I appreciate so much more the freedoms that I would have taken for granted before I started this project, and I really appreciate the people that fought for me to have the right. I'm getting married in April, which is something that growing up I didn't think I was going to get to do, because even within Ireland we had gay marriage from 2015 onwards, the marriage equality movement. So the fact that I can get married at home, but I can also get married here, passed slightly before that in this country, so 2013, 2014, I think. That feels incredible, but that didn't happen overnight. That was a very long, hard fought war to get that over the line. And I think slightly more in Ireland because we had to get people to actually vote because of the way that our constitution is worded. Whereas in this country, it was still really, really, really difficult. So many people have made it so that we have support services. We have the transgender centre on Broadway. We have gay pubs that are able to have rainbow walls. It's incredible. It is absolutely incredible. I don't want to take any of it for granted ever again.